Good morning, and thank you for the opportunity to address the committee. I'm not going to get to the slides for just a moment. I am also daunted to be in the room. As I told Bruce Altavote when we were organizing this, I am not a doctor. A JD does not count.
Right.
And
that was for my daughter-in-law, the attorney.
I want to go back to what Dr. Hauser said at the beginning about the need for an energetic debate. And having an energetic debate requires having an active inquiry about the data on both sides of the issue. I think as a lead-in to what I'm going to talk about, I think it's important to make a couple of points. One is, a lot of the research here is about costs versus benefits of gun ownership, or costs versus benefits of various types of control. As a fundamental issue from our perspective, gun ownership is a fundamental right for law-abiding people, and so the value of the cost-benefit inquiry is somewhat limited, because to what degree can a right be taken away or infringed based on a cost-benefit analysis. But having said that, if you look at the research to date, there's been a lot of research in the public health community focused on costs of gun ownership, and much less on the benefit. And I think we need to consider two things: both the value of ownership for things like self-defense and so on, and also the costs of controls in terms of impact on the ability of law-abiding individuals to protect themselves, for example. A final preface, and here I'm going to here one of my slides is going to a couple of my slides are going to echo Dr. Cook's very closely, is that a lot of the information on important issues surrounding this debate is very old, and I think that's largely a factor of the remarkable decline in crime that we've experienced in the United States since 1991, a period during which, I might add, the number of firearms owned, number of carry permit holders, and so on have also dramatically increased. But having said that, I'm going to get into straight into my slides, and I will be very brief here. I would expect to finish well within the time limit. First of all, it's well past time to update our research on defensive gun uses. We've had only a few very large-scale surveys, such as Professor Kleck's and Professors Cook and Ludwig. And bearing in mind the 2-year lag time between the surveys actually being conducted and publication date, you're looking at data that's now 18 years old and was at the beginning of the decline in crime. But during that period, the violent crime rate has gone down 46%. And then you also have to look at the effective right to carry laws and other changes in the legal regime. There was a news article within the last week or so talking about this, and whether the estimates that we have from the 1990s on defensive gun uses are still valid. And most of the people interviewed in the article suggested, well, the number of defensive gun uses has probably declined because of the decline in crime. There would be fewer occasions for people to use guns in self-defense. On the other hand, there are potential countervailing factors that need to be looked at, largely the apparent increase, or certainly the legally likely increase, in the rate of people carrying guns for self-protection outside the home. We know, for example, from the analysis of the Government Accountability Office, that there are about 8 million carry permit holders in the United States. Now, we don't have a baseline for earlier years, but we do know that that the percentage of the U.S. population living in right-to-carry states has gone from 29.1%, only 21 states in 1994, to 67.6% in 41 states today. You also have an unknown number of people who lawfully carry guns without permits, either carrying on the person in states where no permit is required, or in the case of Vermont, even available. And then you also have exceptions to prohibitions on concealed carry in other states. So, for example, you don't need a permit in most states to carry a firearm openly. at least the most right to carry states. You don't need a permit in many states to carry firearms in vehicles, including in many states to carry firearms loaded in vehicles for personal protection. So those are some of the countervailing factors to look at, and would suggest as a hypothesis that the number of defensive gun uses probably hasn't gone down. If it has gone down, probably hasn't gone down as much as the violent crime rate would suggest. Another thing that's in need of update on the benefit side of gun ownership is inmate surveys. There are, of course, a lot of prison inmate surveys. Criminologists and people in the field find them very valuable in studying criminal behavior, and of course, they may be expensive, but you get a good response rate, I suspect, because you have literally a captive audience. But many of the recent ones haven't considered things related to the potential benefits of gun ownership. So, for example, the Wright and Rossi survey conducted in the early 1980s asked inmates about the potential effect of guns on their victim selection process, on their own fear of injury, or their decisions not to commit a crime at all in the first place. Those figures are now nearly 30 years old, and it would be very interesting to see how that's changed, and very useful for the public debate to see how that's changed given changes in firearms laws and self-defense laws. I mentioned there have been a couple of limited studies, Wright and Decker studies. They did one on burglars and one on armed robbers, both very interesting because the focus was on looking at active criminals rather than incarcerated criminals, so it required some rather daring research methods. And then you also have very interesting but FBI studies on attackers of law enforcement officers, very limited in number, fortunately, and so largely anecdotal, but there were some interesting findings there that could be worthy of follow-up. And my third research area, I'm going to basically be repeating Professor Cook here a lot. We have had very little research on lawful gun ownership and lawful firearms markets since Cook and Ludwig's surveys conducted in 1994. And so we have important gaps in key public debates. For example, we have this constant debate over restrictions on magazine capacity. And the choices of numerical limits to put on magazine capacity tend to be the product essentially of a political bidding war. You know, in 1994, Congress enacted a ban on magazines holding more than 10 rounds of ammunition. Well, why 10? No one has ever really answered why 10. 10 is a round number. You know, we use base 10 arithmetic in the Western world, and that's probably about it. The fact is that prior to 1994, there were actually very few firearms designed to hold exactly 10 rounds of ammunition. More typically, larger caliber handguns would hold 7 or 8, and larger caliber handguns would hold anywhere from 13 to 17 on up. But now we have state legislation that restricts magazines holding more than 7, more than 10, more than 15. Some restrictions affecting magazines holding more than 20, and so that would be worth looking at, we think, just as an important question out there. How many people own how many guns? And then the other thing, in terms of understanding the real world impact of current and proposed restrictions, is the number of magazines people own. Professor Coper, for example, suggested, and all of the follow-up surveys on the 1994 ban suggested that the ban couldn't have had a measurable effect because it was only in position for a short time, and it would have a greater effect as guns and magazines wore out or were discarded or destroyed. Well, that may be so, but the question is, how long might that take? And if it would take many decades or centuries potentially, given the durability of firearms, is this the most effective intervention that can be made? So, for example, it would be useful to look at how many magazines people own. Firearms are commonly sold with 1 or 2 spare magazines, but people certainly buy more spares than that, and there are retailers that will sell them by the carton, case, or forklift pallet if you have the money. And then the second thing, which both Professor Cook and Mr. Gross talked about, is private transfers of firearms. The 40% figure has been endlessly talked about. The Washington Post fact checker column has progressively increased President Obama's Pinocchio rating based on his repetition of it after being warned that it's unreliable. And it would be useful to know, if we're going to debate this and potentially impose serious legal risks on gun owners, it would be worth knowing how many transactions that this would actually affect. So, for example, Mr. Gross talked about internet sales, internet-related transactions. Well, I think there might be a fair hypothesis that the increase in internet advertising of firearms might actually increase the rate at which those transfers go through FFLs. Think about how it works in the real world. If I'm a gun collector looking for a particular type of firearm in 1992, 93, 94, whenever you want to look at back then, I would have had to scrounge classified ads, troll the local gun shows, and so on. Today, I can go on a website, find the gun for sale anywhere in the country, and have it shipped to a local federal firearms licensee in my state who's going to have to conduct a background check. So you potentially have an increase in the regulation of firearms based on internet advertising rather than a decrease. Finally, I'm going to talk, my time's almost up, so I want to throw in my fourth bonus suggestion, as everyone else seems to, which is a further study of the beneficial effects of firearms ownership and education, accident reduction, benefits from participation in structured activities, and socialization into lawful gun use for youth, for example. And that will wrap it up for me, and I thank the committee for the invitation.
Great, thank you very much. Now, I assume that our colleagues know how to make the Skype work. It'll take 2 minutes.